We are very pleased to be sponsoring the Chua lectures for 2015. I'd like to welcome everybody here at this amended time today. We had to change schedules just a little bit for today only. We'll be back at our regular time next week. What I'd like to do is just let you know that today on Lecture 10, this is a lecture that I've been looking forward to pretty much from the beginning of the lecture series on local activity and edge of chaos, trying to figure out what all of this stuff means. So I'd like to bring Leon up to the stage and welcome him, and let's get started.
Thank you. Good morning. I noticed we have a full house this morning. Hope you are attracted mainly with the title and not with the pizzas. Okay. But just as a plug, we have 2 more lectures, of course, and the last lecture, I have composed a poem that's very relevant, and I don't have pizza to offer you, but if you come, you will get, each one of you, a nice parchment type with my poem on it, which you can bring home and frame if you wish, or you can just pin it up in your office. Okay, well, today I'm going to talk about really the solid stuff that we've been plugging along, and so it's called local activity, edge of chaos, and if there's something deeper than anything, this is it, okay? But obviously, I'm not going to, I developed this theory for over 20 years. I'm not going to be able to give you the details in 1 hour, okay? But let me start by telling you there are 3 great unsolved problems in neurobiology. And you know all these people, the Turing's morphogenesis, I call it an enigma, because it's an unsolved problem. All of these are more than 60 years old. Smear's 2-cell paradox, and Huxley spike mystery. All of them are classic problems that are unsolved, and I'll tell you the solution is the edge of chaos. So I hope that this will be a good start to motivate. All of you know Alan Turing, and he published, by the way, a fantastic paper in biology of all things. You know, he's the father of computer science. He published 1 paper and only 1 paper in biology, and that's it. And this is a phenomenal paper that we're going to talk about. But it's all about gastrulation. How many of you know something about gastrulation or heard about it? Well, incredible. You and I came from there, you know. So let me have a quick review. It started with you, and our mother's egg get fertilized right there and quickly divide from 1 cell to 2 cells to 4 to 8 to 16, and in a short period of time, you have into a hollow ball, what's called a blastula. It's a ball, okay? It's a miniature basketball, and if you look under the microscope, every cell is identical. So the obvious thing is that there's no spatial direction, and if you did leave it untouched, you should remain symmetrical because there's no differences. And yet, as if there's a imaginary finger from God, sometime shortly after that, somebody will push it in and dent it in this cross section, and that's quickly followed the intestine, the organ, the brain, and eventually an embryo, and then you and me. So we all came from this stage, okay? And this is just one cross section of that, okay? So gastrulation is a dynamic evolution process from a perfectly symmetrical blastula into a non-symmetrical embryo. Okay, now Sir Lewis Wilber said it best. He said that it is not birth, marriage, or death, but gastrulation, which is truly the important event in our life. So you will remember this word gastrulation from now on, I hope. And so nobody understood what it is, how come it could suddenly deform and became the genus of you and me. And nobody really had a good answer until Alan Turing, a mathematician, came along and said maybe if I could find a simple enough equation and show that at least mathematically this is possible, maybe that would be good progress. So he started with what's called a reaction diffusion equation. The left side is called the reaction part, and the right side is called the diffusion part. And the diffusion part, of course, is the Laplacian. And if you discretize the Laplacian, you will get exactly what you have early on. You saw this grid And this is the sombrero, the lateral inhibition that we went through. So we're recalling this, the diffusion part is nothing but the lateral inhibition. And that is the right-hand side. And the equivalent right is the grid. It's a resistive grid, dissipated grid. If you put in Chua circuit, you've seen all kinds of pattern already last week. Or if you put in the Huxley thing, you have seen the spiral web. And all of them are reaction diffusion equation. All of them have the reaction part, which are the cells. In this case, it's Huxley cell. And then you have dissipation, all the grids. So the whole point is you got something to dumb things down, and then the opposite happened. Okay, that's the whole issue here, and nobody understood why. So Turing said, look, I'm going to start by showing you that this is possible. And he said, I'm going to start with just two cells. Two identical cells, the left and the right. So and this is just consider two molecules, two kinds of molecules, concentration, X1, Y1 for molecule on the left, and X2, Y2, the concentration molecule on the right. They will, and for now, they are completely uncoupled, so they're independent. So you have two equations. And here, Turing must have spent days trying to figure out what number to put on. I'll show you later on that my theory will tell you how to pick those numbers. But Turing, being very clever, nobody else would have done it, but Turing seemed to feel that that's possible. So he finally got it done with these numbers. And look at, if you let X and Y be all equal to 1, everything becomes 0. In other words, 1 is the equilibrium solution. X1, Y1, X2, they're all equal to 1 at equilibrium. And now, Turing said, let's put in diffusion, the right side. That's a one-dimensional diffusion. So now you put in a resistor. That's the interpretation. And again, you can see that if you put 1 and for X and Y, they can go to 0. So it's still the equilibrium. But the difference is, now, so these are the four. The bottom part is the equation with the equilibrium all put in one matrix form now. So your left side is the reaction part with all those numbers, 5 minus 6, 6 minus 7, and repeat it for the second cell. And the right part is the diffusion part. If you find the eigenvalues of the left side, you find that they're all equal to -1, which means everything's stable. Everything dumps up. If you look at the eigenvalue on the right-hand side, you can see it's always a negative or 0. Again, it's damped. That's what we expect because it's all resistor. So you now have two matrices that are both sort of damped. You know, they both have negative eigenvalues. And if you ask any mathematician, and I would challenge you, ask any even math professor at Stanford, and ask him, if you add two matrices that both have negative eigenvalues together, what would you get the eigenvalue of the new matrix if you add them two? And I can almost guarantee you that almost all mathematicians will tell you, of course, it will be -2. But Turing has the great insight that may not necessarily be true if you're clever enough. So you must have followed around a long time to find this number and show that, in fact, if you add these two together, you got the one in the bottom. That's just the sum of the two. And sure enough, he found the eigenvalue on the right side, the G, the red one, is +2. So this is incredible. Nobody would have believed that that's possible. But this is Turing's contribution. And from that, he can show that you can have a sphere, and you can have pattern, and those patterns are called Turing patterns. Okay? Now, so the question Turing didn't know the answer of. That's why it's an unsolved problem. What special property does G1, the left one, have to destabilize the right side? Because the right side obviously is totally useless. It's just dumping. So it's the left side that has some special property. What is that property? He didn't have the answer, but he knows that there must be some property. Okay? And so Turing's instability, and I'm telling you now the answer is, that property is called the edge of chaos. And now, I'm going to just tell you that, as I promised, I always give you the latest. This is the latest result that Professor Fortuna and Frasca from University of Catania just sent me just last week. They have developed a circuit that will produce this pattern. And these are Turing patterns. But if anyone who knows Turing, you will see immediately that you have a Turing pattern. And the beauty about this is that the circuit consists of just an inductor, capacitor, and a memristor that has a negative slope. And that's the locally active memristor. And so this is the latest result to show you that you can have Turing pattern with cells like that. Okay? Now, so So now also for blastula, some years ago, I had one of my students put in a buckyball type of CNN. So we have 64 cells, and this is a CNN cell, except that each cell has only 3 neighbors. And so this is the template on the left. And if I pick the template on the left side, because there is no B and Z, because otherwise it's not interesting. There's no input. The whole point is there's absolutely no input. Nobody forces you to do anything, okay? But I pick the numbers there's where it is locally passive, and you can see, as you expect, completely symmetrical, like a blastula, it should be totally the same color. Now I'm going to change using my theory, change that parameter so that make it locally active. The cell will now be locally active on the left. Now you see it's a different pattern. So in a sense, I have a sort of a simple CNN that already demonstrated that the gastrulation is possible. Now these are static patterns, fixed color, okay? 20 years later, Stephen Smale, as you already know, had the Field Medal, you know, and he 20 years later, he came back and say, Turing, he was fascinated by Turing's paper, and he said, but Turing only shows static pattern. Maybe I can make it oscillate, make it one that's better. So he still have 2 cells, but he made the cell a little bit more complicated, and sure enough, he was able to make it oscillate. And Smith sort of tried to be cute. He said that before you couple them, they are dead in the sense that you know, everybody's stable and it's dead. And he coupled by diffusions have become alive. That's the terminology now people use, dead and alive, you know. Okay, so Stephen Smale asked, what axiomatic properties must a reaction diffusion system possess to make the Turing interacting system oscillate? That's an unsolved problem, okay? So the second unsolved problem. And in fact, Smith was quite pessimistic. He said any sort of, this is copied directly from his paper. He said any sort of systematic understanding or analysis seems far away. Before one can expect any general understanding, many examples will have to be thought through, both on the mathematical side and on the experimental side. So he was very pessimistic, and he was right. It took 40 years before I solved it, okay? Smith's paradox is now resolved, and the answer I get is the edge of chaos. So now, if I give you one more example, I'm going to make one up the ante. Smith was able to say that he can produce oscillation. Now I'm going to produce chaos for you. I have 2 truss circuits. I change make the parameter so that you have a stable. Each side is stable. One equilibrium point. I'm going to connect a resistor, make more damping, and what you get is on the right side. You get chaos. And again, the answer is because the left side, before then, it was on each circuit was on the edge of chaos. So I hope I've given you enough motivation already. And now this is the third unsolved problem. Huxley and Huxley, of course, as you all know, we've done it many times. The great contribution is that they were able to produce the model on top. I mean, the Huxley circuit on top, which I later shown that they are made of memristors, actually. But that's not the issue here. The issue here is that they were able to produce, if you have a line of that identical cells, you will produce action potential. So that's what they got the Nobel Prize for. But they did not know, and no one still know, how is it possible to have this action potential that go from almost nothing to 100 millivolt, jump in a very short period of time? How is that possible? We're going to have to answer that today as well. And the answer, again, is the edge of chaos with an additional new mathematical result that you will learn today. So Schrodinger, Prigogine, Eigen, Gell-Mann, Turing, Smale, all of them luminaries that I've seen from last week, have all been searching for a missing new physical principle. They all knew that something had to be, there's some missing principle there. And the missing principle, as I say, is called local activity and edge of chaos. Now, all of them have advocated certain idea. Schrodinger, for example, said that you got to have an external supply of energy, and of course he's right. Prigogine said that you need to have what he called the instability of the homogeneous. Things have to be unstable of the homogeneous part. And Gell-Mann said you have to have amplification. Now all of you have seen this little cute book by Schrodinger. I'm going to read you a sentence here to show you that this is a fundamental problem. So on page 86, Schrodinger said, we must be prepared to find a new type of physical law prevailing in it. Or are we to term it a non-physical, not to say a super-physical law? So he was challenging himself that we need to have a physical law, and what is that? And interesting that Schrodinger's book is in 1944. Go back 20 years to, how many of you know The Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann? A few. Well, anyway, this is the great book. Because he got the Nobel Prize in 1929 mainly for this book. It's written in German. It's called Zauberberg, The Magic Mountain. And I was very thrilled about this because, in fact, just exactly 10 years ago, I was in Germany, and there was a publication of one of Thomas Mann's daughter, and from here I got in a lot of insight how he's a novelist, and yet I'm going to tell you that he already, like Marcel Proust, that I talked about a few lectures ago, who has no scientific background, and he essentially tells us the memory in our brain came from the hippocampus. Well, Thomas Mann, I'm going to read you a few sentences to show you, and this is 20 years before Schrodinger. I'm not sure Schrodinger has read his book because you could say he plagiarized it. Okay, now I'm sure he did not. I'm going to read you this book. This is a great book about Hans Castorp, and it's just a wonderful book you should read. And so I'm just reading one section here to tell you. He said, "What was life? It was warm, okay? The warmth produced by instability, attempting to preserve form." That's incredible. Warmth is energy. You need to have energy, and produced by instability, which is pregogenous, instability, homogeneous. Okay, attempting to preserve form. Form is the pattern. Okay, and then later on he said that but although it was not material, it was sensual to the point of lust and revulsion. It was matter, shamelessly sensitive to stimuli. That's pretty good. That's Gell-Mann. Stimuli, you have to be sensitive, and that's amplification of fluctuation. So all of this essence, just like Marcel Proust, has already been instilled on this literature, non-scientists. And in fact, I found out that even before Thomas Mann, how many of you know Henry Bergson? None? Well, Henry Bergson, you should read that. By the way, he got a Nobel Prize in literature just a year before Gell-Mann. And he came up with this wonderful élan vital. French word, if you translate it, it's called vital force. He preceded Thomas Mann, and he was telling that how life can come out is because of élan vital. And if you go back 3,000 years before the Christian era, you'll find that from the myth and things that people were talking about élan vital even then. And so everybody really has the idea that there is a missing principle, and I'll tell you, élan vital is local activity. Okay, so that's, I hope, would and now let's start with Gell-Mann. He said that you need to have to be able to amplify fluctuations, and Schrodinger said you need energy, and Prigogine said you need nonlinearity. So now I'm going to give you the ingredient. I give you all the batteries. So I satisfy Schrodinger. You got energy. I give you any kind of diodes you want, and so I satisfy Prigogine. You got nonlinearity, and I give you transformers. So I satisfy transformer can amplify, right? So I satisfy Gell-Mann. Okay, so you can put in any noise fluctuation, and you have a huge one. Now, if you do that, you will find that there's no way, no matter how you assemble a circuit, you will never have any pattern, no complexity. What's wrong with that? Well, so if you're mechanical minded, I'll give you mechanical amplifier, such as that. all that, they're all amplified, right? Because Gell-Mann say you got to be able to amplify fluctuation, so that's the amplifier. Or even just a level, this is all amplified. Again, no contraption of that will ever give you complexity. So the question really is fluctuation. You know, Gell-Mann is not precise enough. He just said you need to be able to amplify fluctuation, but fluctuation in what? In position, in velocity, pressure, temperature, chemical concentration, voltage or current, which should be the one that is the correct variable, the state variable to pick to satisfy this Gell-Mann's intuition? And the answer is none of the above. That's the problem, okay? That's why he never got anywhere. Okay, so the correct answer is the local activity principle asserts that the correct physical variable whose amplification is essential for complexity to emerge is energy. That's what you need to be able to amplify. So in local activity is nothing but the ability of a cell to amplify fluctuations in energy, okay? Now, so any system is said to be locally active if and only if it is capable of amplifying infinitesimal fluctuations in energy. So this is the subject that I spent more than 10 years to develop. And I'm not going to have time to go through detail, but I will tell you today 3 important theorems. These 3 theorems is the foundation of this whole theory that will answer all these questions. Okay, so I'm going to if we have time, we can come back to give you more detail. But the whole point here is you need nonlinearity, so in fact, you need big nonlinearity. But on the other hand, Gell-Mann says fluctuation. So from very big to very small. So it's amazing. You need the real property is very small, and that's the good news. Because if it's very small, you can linearize it, and you can do something mathematically. So we're going to just look at a cell that has an impedance. Okay, or admittance. Just look at impedance. So it has a numerator and denominator. You have coefficient. You can massage. You can factor them. The upper one called the zeros. The lower one called the poles. It turns out that from my theory, first theory will tell you what are the conditions that you will get local activity. And this is the first important theory. The proof of course is beyond today, but it's very mathematical, but you don't have to worry about the detail, except that it turns out that there are 4 possible conditions. So there are 4 ways for a cell or a neuron or anything to qualify to be locally active. So it's not that bad. There are 4 ways. The third, and they all involve the impedance in this formulation. And so impedance is a small signal. So we're talking about very small. So that's why everything is mathematical possible, okay? But ignore the 3 and 4 because those are very special cases. But I have to put it here in there because it's part of a theorem, because there are 4 ways you can get local activity. 3 and 4 are sort of pathological, but it is part of a theorem. The important one is just 1 and 2. The first one simply say that you must have at least 1 pole of the impedance in the right half plane. If you have that, that's fine. You got locally active. The second condition says you don't need to have a pole. You can have a second positive, and that is the real part of the impedance must be negative. In other words, it has to look like a negative resistance at some frequency. There are 4 conditions. The first 2 are the sort of generic one, the structure, the robust one. Okay, you only need either 1 or 2 to have local activity. Okay, the first one of course is quite obvious. If you have poly right up, they become unstable. The second one. The second one is somewhat interesting too because it said they had the negative resistance. Okay, and now, the interpretation of local activity says is that one can use local active cell to amplify small signals at the expense of an external power supply. So, for example, neurons in our brain maintain their local level of organization by burning glucose, because you don't get something for nothing. You got to pay for it, and that's the first law of thermodynamics. In fact, every living cell is a molecular amplifier. Okay, and so this now comes to my second principle. This is, in fact, the main result. Okay, it's just like the first law of thermodynamics says that you cannot create energy. It's impossible. The second law says that you cannot go from transfer heat from low temperature to high temperature. So they all fall in terms of something is impossible. Well, this is another kind of impossible situation. He said that if you don't have local activity, it's impossible to complexity, or restated it, complexity or complex and emergent phenomena are impossible without local activity. This is the Deep Theorem because it tells you that without this, you are going to have nothing, okay? And the proof is non-trivial. You can see that it's very mathematical. The first 5 involve fairly sophisticated mathematics. Just quickly, you need something called a nonlinear monotone operator in function space. You need a high-dimensional analog of mean value theorem. Most of you have learned mean value theorem from high school, and you learn, your teacher probably told you that mean value is only good for one scalar, one dimension. It turns out that if you relax something, if you don't demand completely, you can actually have a high-dimensional mean value theorem. That's what you needed to prove this theorem. Then you need something sophisticated called a Lasser's complete stability theorem. You need a Poisson integral on a half plane. You need a positive real function of the complex variable. All these 5 are mathematics, but I can tell you not all most mathematics don't know all of these things. That may be the reason why they haven't found it yet. But the real reason mathematicians couldn't have proven this theorem is because you need a 6th condition, and that's strict circuit theory. It's called Taylor's theorem. So again, I'm just telling you why, how come these people haven't thought about this? Because you got to have all these ingredients to prove this theorem. It's non-trivial theorem. Is it okay? So local activity in some is the origin of complexity, and edge of chaos, you see shortly, is just a gem, a special case of that. Okay, an uncoupled cell is said to be on edge of chaos if it is locally active at some asymptotically stable equilibrium. It means that remember you can have 4 conditions to be locally active, but if you demand that the cell should be asymptotically stable, so it doesn't satisfy condition 1. It doesn't satisfy 3 and 4 as well. Only condition 2, okay? So therefore, this is you are demanding 2 things. Because in many cases, in most cases, you can have both 1 and 2. You have a pole and right half plane, and the real part is negative. That's easy. If you demand that only 2 be the reason for local activity, that condition is what I call edge of chaos. And because you have 2 demands and not just 1, it means that the choices of the parameter are much smaller. It is the reason why the edge of chaos is always tend to be a very small area. And it is the good news because it allows us to. There was a question last lecture from somebody on a while, and they were asking, how do you find this parameter? Well, the answer is very simple. Because if you're on the edge of chaos, you already have narrowed yourself into a little tiny nook. And so you can afford now to just enumerate them. And that's why edge of chaos is a gem, okay? All right, now, let me just go on now. Now, let me summarize it. So you have the Husky-Huxley equation on the left, which is nonlinear. Then you have the small signal equivalent circuit on the right, which is a linearized version about the equilibrium point. So it is a fluctuation that Gelman is asking for. He didn't know what it is. This is it, okay? You got to get to the smaller signal equivalent circuit. But now what's the circuit? It has an inductance and a resistance in series. Remember that, okay? Now this turned out to be crucial in interpretation. And now this is from the Husky-Huxley, we found out that the tiny region that I call the right boundary and the left boundary is just tiny bit, less than 2 microampere. And it is that region that you can have interest, you can have life, for example. So the tiny edge of chaos domain is the Goldilocks zone, where complex phenomena, and complex means action potential, gastrulation, Liouville spot hallucination, all of these interesting things can happen. It happens in such a small region. So to summarize, all cells can be divided into locally passive, which is totally useless, to something that is not passive, that means locally active. But that locally active region could be fairly large, and you still may have to wait a long time before you found it. But edge of chaos is such a tiny, I have to exaggerate, it's actually much smaller. And that's where interesting things happen. Turing's example that I saw you, two cell, is in that green edge of chaos region. So he must have spent a lot of time because he didn't have a theory. Because if you just put in some number, you're always going to get locally passive. You know, it's obvious. You have two matrices that have negative eigenvalue, add them together. Of course, you're going to have negative eigenvalue, except if you happen to be in the edge of chaos. Okay. So now I show you that I have a way to find Turing's equation. Just make that second condition. Okay. All right. Now let me move on to. So I have proved that by virtue of the fact that the Haskins-Hartley, the action potential occurs in the edge of chaos, we can say the neuron, our neuron, your neurons, are all poised near the edge of chaos. Okay, and the action potential from the Haskins-Hartley, in fact, now that you know you're in the edge of chaos, you can be a little bit more greedy and say, tell me more about it. And I'll tell you more about it is that you have to be in what I call the subcritical half bifurcation. This is a fairly deep mathematics now, but I will tell you at least that now first let me just review. You know, if you have imagine you're tuning a parameter. If you are in electrical engineering, you take a course on oscillator, you will always be taught that you make the tuning parameter so that the poles are on the imaginary axis, and then you have, you know, all this concentric. This is called harmonic oscillator. But that is not reality. No oscillator ever operates that way because you have every possible amplitude. We know that you have an oscillator, there's only one amplitude. It can only be either on the right side or on the left side of that. If you're on the right side of the parameter, when the eigenvalue become unstable, you can see it's unwinding. This is where most of the oscillator come from that you design in the electronic circuit. The more interesting thing is the one on the left side. It is when you must have this property on the when you massage a parameter so that you're on the left half plane, things are stable. You see, it's stable, okay. And yet the interesting thing is that if you are locally, if you are in the edge of chaos, you are exactly in that region, and the half bifurcation theorem says that you have what's called a subcritical half bifurcation. This is a very deep theorem, by the way. This is the whole book, you see, it's a half bifurcation theorem. And most of this book is devoted to the proof of that. And tell you how difficult it is, I'm going to tell you, if you just look at one page, you see full of equations. I'll just tell you really one sentence here to tell you how difficult it is. He was talking about that this is so messy, and he said, we're not joking. One has to be prepared to shack up with a previous calculation for several days. Details will be sent only on serious request. So he didn't even have enough pages to give the complete proof. That's how difficult this theorem is. But we don't need to have a proof. We just know that there is such a theorem called a subcritical half bifurcation theorem. And that theorem tells you the following. It is now on the left half side. You see, on the right side, things become unstable, so you have an oscillation. It is on the left-hand side that is tricky. Because it is stable, it turns out there is a small limit cycle, but typically very small. So if you don't know it, you say, oh, of course it's stable. Smear says it's dead, you know. But because of the subcritical half bifurcation, it also says that limit cycle exists outside, it's unstable. So if you have just a small enough noise, get you outside what's called a base sheet of attraction, then you have boom. That's what you see on the right-hand side. So from the just below the dotted line, now jump up. That is exactly the reason for you have to have the action potential. So I have completely explained how Haskins-Hartley's action potential came from. Okay, and edge of chaos is indeed the hidden route to complexity. Now, I didn't have any time to give you any proof. If you want to learn all this, the details of this, just an introduction, you will take another 12 lectures, okay? That would be unrealistic. But I have given you, remember, a reader in the first lecture that tells you that essentially all this messy proof essentially is the essence of this first lecture. If you recall from lecture 1, if you didn't attend my lecture 1, you can play back from the internet. And it says that I have a black box, And I put in a battery, and I turned on the switch, and I found for any initial condition, the current go to steady state. You know, everything is stable, not interesting. And now I've added 4 ohm resistor in there, which makes it more stable. So you would expect that you would just have another exponential. It's just a little bit slower, more sluggish. And yet, if you pick the right black box, you actually go to get something blowing up. And that was the reader. And in fact, I gave you actually a hint. You know, so as I said, the answer to Chua's reader, the reader is what's inside the black box. The answer is the essence of the proof of the edge of chaos. And now it will make sense to you. I even give you a hint then that it has a resistor and inductor in series. On top is obvious, you know. Now the question is, what values of R and L can you assign so that you will get the one on top stable, and then if you add a 4 ohm resistor, you actually make it blow up. What it turned out, now that you see this, remember the resistor, inductor in series, the answer is just make them negative. If you both are negative, the time constant become positive. That's why it's stable. Okay, but that's a secret. You know, it's hidden. Because nobody knows that it's dead, but it's according to Smith, but it's hidden potential there. If you add the 4 ohm resistor on the right, notice now that suddenly you become a plus 2 ohm in series with a minus 2 Henry. That gives you a positive time constant, and that is what blowing up. I think everybody will understand this. This is exactly the secret, the reason why edge of chaos is so unintuitive. Okay, so I hope that I've just rushed through this data, but at least I hope I've convinced you that edge of chaos is really a gem, okay? And the reason it's a gem is because you have to satisfy 2 properties. So it narrows down the possibility of the parameters, and which is the good news, okay? And the real good news is that these are, because of Gell-Mann's idea, I mean, I didn't get the Gell-Mann, but because it has to be infinitesimal, it means that all the tools in linear analysis, algebra can be applied. That's why I have my theorem here, okay? All right, now, without the proof, I hope you believe that, again, to summarize, there are 3 theorems. The first theorem says, the first three important, the first result is what is local activity. There are the 4 conditions. Say that if you satisfy one of those 4, you have local activity. But so what? It's not interesting. So what? You have another element or cell that has this property. So you need a second theorem, the principle, which says that if and only if you have that condition, you have complexity. That's called the local activity principle. That's why these are 2 important things. And the third condition, the third theorem tells you that not only is possible, but you can actually make it unstable by adding dissipation. These are the 3 theorems that the fundamental result that is the cornerstone of this theory that I have developed. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you that how do you get local activity? There are many ways. You have seen tons of examples now. You have seen so many books because everybody thought that they had found a new method. It turns out that those are all different ways of getting local activity. They are not the real reason. They are not the principle. So, but basically, the most common situation to get local activity is positive feedback. It's the most typical case. Obvious one is, imagine I'm using a very old slide with the old television set, and you have a camera looking at the thing, and then the output of the television is feedback into the camera. Of course, you have positive feedback. If you do that, what do you get? Well, you get all kinds of patterns, like this, like that, okay? So that's an example of positive feedback. Of course, that's local activity. But a more familiar one would be laser. In the laser, you have a pump which produces energy, and you have an active material. This is what gets local activity. And if you look at the situation, if you don't have the right parameters, all the atoms are not cooperating. They are all incoherent. Everybody wants to do his own way, okay? But because you have a local active media, you can put in the right parameter, and suddenly everybody cooperates. That's basically what the local activity is doing. And you can interpret that if you write the equation of laser, you can show that before it lasers, you essentially have a nonlinearity that's monotonic. But as you tune that parameter, because it's locally active, you have an active material, you can bend that sort of become an S-curve. you have suddenly a negative slope. Bingo, that's what you have for local activity. Okay, and what you have essentially is what the physicists call symmetry breaking. Before this happened, you have one bottom, one valley. But if you tune the parameter, if you have a locally active medium, you can tune the parameter, and the bottom sort of broaden up, and eventually it actually push up in the middle, and now you have 3 equilibrium points, 2 stable and 1 unstable one. This is the typical situation that you get from the locally positive feedback. So these are all familiar picture, and this is what's called symmetry breaking. And very familiar to physicists, but I'm telling you that this is all a consequence of local activity. If you're a chemist, you know about autocatalysis, okay? It's another way of getting positive feedback. Prigogine, for example, is famous for producing this reaction. The first reaction is just a molecule A is first converted into one of the X. And reaction 2 is that a molecule of X reacts with a molecule of B to form Y and C. And finally, the third reaction says 2 molecules of X continue with 1, combine with 1 of Y to produce 3 of X. So essentially, you can see from 2X, the third reaction, 2X to 3X. That's amplification of fluctuation. That's Gelman's condition, okay? So even though Prigogine didn't realize that's what it is, and that is local activity. As soon as you have that, you have local activity. And of course, everybody knows Peter Higgs from last year's Nobel Prize. The Higgs particle, if you look carefully at his publication, you see that he has this wonderful symmetry breaking. And that is what the local activity comes from, okay? So it follows from the local activity principle that an infinitesimally small and hidden form of excitability gives rise to quantum symmetry breaking. The universe, with its expanding complexity, emerged at the edge of chaos where the initial quantum state was destabilized. So you have to destabilize the homogeneity to have what we have in the cosmos today. Universes, in fact, emerge again, by this argument, emerge from the edge of chaos, in the sense that without local activity and symmetry breaking, there's going to be no cosmic existence. Okay? The local activity principle is applicable also, interestingly enough, to non-physical systems. Now here, I'm going to have to be waving my hand because it's no longer, I don't have equations. Everything I said so far are precise because I have equation and I can tell you everything I say is 100% correct. Now, but I'm saying that from those experience, one can argue that the same thing is happening. It's just for the future generation researcher, the economists to come back and say, well, look, let me write the equation and let me show you we have local activity as well. So these are the possibilities. World Wide Web, economic system, or social system. For example, look at World Wide Web. The positive feedback in the World Wide Web comes from, in fact, the circular influences that web page authors and users have on one another. Each one taking action that are influenced by the other. You can see the positive feedback now, okay? Because valuable web pages tend to accumulate incoming links, and pages can become more valuable by linking to other valuable pages. I hope it makes sense to you. Okay, I have no equation, but I'm telling you, this is local activity without equation. Even block is locally active. In what sense? Well, the amplification property of blocks results in many interesting social phenomena on the web. For example, propagation of memes on the web can start with a single block site distributing a funny or unusual link. Other block sites exhibiting almost a flocking behavior. Remember all this flocking of birds? The same kind of thing, flocking behavior. Redistribute the meme, which impacts not only the content that people read, but also the links that persist on the web. In this way, ideas and information, both true, false, or otherwise, of course, can circumnavigate the globe multiple times in a single day, making the circular influences of linking patterns all the more pronounced. This is local activities, positive feedback, okay? More applications include cosmology of sin, psychology, even political science. Extreme events such as tsunami, earthquakes, riots, stock markets collapse, which appear perfectly calm until triggered must originate from the edge of chaos. And you can see they all have this signature of edge of chaos. And I will bet you that if you give me the equations that are realistic, I will be able to produce you a proof that they are on the edge of chaos. Stock market crashes originate from locally active economy, for example, clearly. Riots during demonstrations are triggered by locally active interaction among demonstrators. You have a whole crowd of people, no matter they are very ruly, but you need to have a few locally active guys there, and you can create riots, okay? And so all of this makes it, right? And then we can be a bit more creative now. I mean, we can be more ambitious or more greedy. We can ask for more. Well, creativity. Well, creativity, in fact, is a manifestation of local activity. Think about it. And with creativity, we talk about intelligence. Because intelligence is an example par excellence of emergent computation, of complexity. And just to make this point true, I'm going to give you what I call the famous bear story. How many of you have known about the bear story? A few of you. Well, here's a true example of intelligence, okay? Well, there's an old story. This is not mine. It's an old story about a philosopher who is very clever, who runs when a bear charges him. What in Yosemite? It's somebody that, he was with his friend, who is a mathematician. Then suddenly this bear was charging them. So the philosopher began to run. His mathematician friend is very logical. He said, it's no good. You will never outrun a bear. Okay, why do you have to run? Well, the answer is, I don't have to. I only have to outrun you. That's intelligent. Okay? This is something that you can see that you have to have something extra. And that's edge of chaos. Now here's another example which is not intelligent. Talk about how about robots? How much intelligence can we give a robot? This is a true example. Some years ago, the state agency that during the Cold War days, funded a lot of millions of dollars to develop a Russian translation from English to Russian. And so after the grant was over, the admiral came over and wanted to see what's the result. And the people were very proud. They give all kinds of demonstration, Russian, English, Russian, thing. But the admiral came with a simple example. He's a religious person, so he took up his Bible. He read. He said, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." That's from the Bible. So what's the robot says? The translation: "The vodka is good, but the meat is rotten." That's not intelligent. Okay. That's the difference. Okay. All right. Now, I have given you this picture twice already, okay? And there's a reason for that. There is this barber that's idiosyncratic. He's the only barber in town, and he will shape only men who don't shape themselves. The question of who shapes the barber. Now, it turned out this is not mine. This is the famous, called the Barber Paradox. And it was no other than Bertrand Russell that put up this posture. How many of you have already known about this Barber posture? A few. This is really deep stuff. So listen carefully, okay? So who shapes the barber? Well, listen, the barber, there are two possibilities. First, the barber does not shape himself. But that means that the barber will have to shape himself, right? So you can see you're going around a feedback now. So the barber will have to shape himself. But if the barber shape himself, the second possibility, then the barber does not shape himself because of his rule. You see the contradiction? Okay? So this is what's called self-reference. It's an example par excellence of positive feedback. We've been seeing, and once you have positive feedback, you have local activity. Okay? So the Barber self-referential dynamics is positive feedback resulting in local activity. Within the framework of classical logic, the Barber's paradox is undesirable. Undecidable. That's Bertrand Russell's famous result. Okay? Because by showing that paradoxical statements could appear in ordinary language and logic, Bertrand Russell had shown that the standard methods of logical inference are too weak to resolve even simple questions. The Barber's local interaction rule in Bertrand-Russell is essentially locally active. Now, let's fast forward to Gödel. How many of you know Gödel's incompleteness theorem? Great. This is probably the deepest result there is, okay? Kurt Gödel, by the way, is famous for this Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And if those of you who have never heard of this before, you would want to know it because this is probably the deepest thing there is in intellectual atmosphere. In fact, even Einstein believes that Gödel's incompleteness theorem is the deepest intellectual creation of the human brain, an example of emergence par excellence. Yeah. You got to be crazy to be able to come up with this theorem. And indeed, he was crazy. Okay? He died thinking that he's going to be poisoned, and he just starved himself to death. So you have to be crazy to come up with this theorem. In fact, Einstein, this is from another famous economist, Morgenstern. He had been a friend of Einstein, and Einstein once told me, to him, I mean, that his own world no longer meant much to him, and that he simply came to the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study to have the privilege of walking home with Gödel, just to show you what kind of intellect this person was. Okay? So what's his result? Gödel's result is the following. He proved in 1931 that there are mathematical propositions that can be seen to be true, but cannot be proved to be true. Think about it. This is so deep, right? I mean, almost unreal. Okay? And yet this is the deepest theorem available. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is, in fact, mathematically equivalent to the Barber's paradox. This is the reason I've been giving you this paradox. It turned out that Gödel came up with a very ingenious way of translating Bertrand Russell's Barber's paradox, which is logic, into mathematics. And that's completely non-trivial. But that was the way, the route where he discovered his incompleteness theorem. Okay? So that is the connection. And the fact that the Barber's paradox is connected to log activity, you know, I'm tempted to say that the Gödel incompleteness theorem can someday be, in fact, understood better by realizing that this is another sort of interpretation of local activity. So local activity is the origin of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, just my own conjecture. Okay? This is not a theorem. Now, to those of you who didn't believe this, I'm going to give you an example. This is called the Goldbach Conjecture, known for hundreds of years already. And it's very simple. Every even number is a sum of 2 primes. I mean, even kids, grade school kids will say, of course, you know, if you know what a prime is, you add any 2 prime, you're going to, you know, and even it will be the sum of 2 prime. There's no possibility of counterexample. And yet, no one can prove this conjecture, even though we all believe that it's true. And the reason it cannot be proved is because of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So the next best thing you do is just to satisfy yourself. People have to use supercomputer. And Goldbach conjecture has been checked to be correct to at least 400 trillion times. People are still checking, okay? Because it's a theorem, so it's got to be true. It's just that just to satisfy, you know, the people who the doubting Thomases that this is Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Okay. Oh, by the way, this is Thomas Mann's book that I had earlier, and I just quote one sentence. I was reading it quite a few sentences, but this is the main sentence that gives it away, you know, in this book. What then was light? It was warmth generated by form-preserving instability. So you can see, warmth is Schrodinger's energy, okay? And instability and form is Prigoghinis's instability of the homogeneous, because he got to generate the form. Form means pattern. So this book is incredible. You know, he was talking, he was a novelist, and yet he was so much deep inside that he came out with the correct, post the correct statement, and there was this was 1924. Schrodinger's sentence I just quoted you, in fact, it's directly you can translate it from this sentence, okay? All right, now this is an even more interesting, how many of you know Kant? Famous, great, most of you know, all of you know about the critique of judgment. And he said, read carefully, an organized being is then not a mere machine, for that has merely moving power, but it possesses in itself formative power of a self-propagating kind, which it communicates to its materials, though they have not it of themselves. It organizes them. Remember, now, this is now the local activity, the edge of chaos. You begin to organize, things begin to fall in line. You know, instead of everybody go its own way, begin to get coordinated because of edge of chaos. In fact, this cannot be explained by the mere mechanical faculty of motion. He was clever enough to realize that there are phenomena that is not obvious, that you cannot explain with your almost simple common sense. That's Immanuel Kant. Okay. Now, before I go on to the next lecture, by the way, I want to move on to an example. I've rushed through this edge of chaos so fast, but just to convince you that they're all, in fact, saying the same thing, I would like to request an example. Can I go to 218? Slide 218, please. Okay. Here's a real example of edge of chaos, because you have heard so much, but I'm not giving you a single real example. This is a real example, a paper that's not yet published. In fact, it's just being submitted by Zabuel Manan, Choi, and Professor Kim from Korea. And they were using, remember, you recall the Chua course Memristors that I presented some weeks ago? They were using this to design oscillators. And how do they do it? Well, remember, this is the VI plot. And if you want to make an oscillator, there are many ways, but the obvious way to find out where are the locally active points, in particular where the edge of chaos point. It turns out that using my theory, they were able to, let me go back here. That is the same picture, the DCVI curve on the right-hand side, except that with all the number indicated. You will notice that on the red, there are three branches, because there are three, if you recall, three equilibrium points. It's just like this double hump Bali. Two stable and one unstable point is exactly that. That's why you have three branches. The green one is the unstable one. The blue and the red are the stable one. But if you look at the numbers that generated from my circuit, you find that there's a little range from minus 10 volt to minus 3.34. That has a negative slope. That is the condition that satisfies the real part of the impedance is negative. And that is the edge of chaos region. So once you can design an oscillator. You just pick a parameter in between there, and they found the Professor Kim and Zhao Bai and his students came up with the equivalent circuit that you see on the left, and you can see that, interestingly, they all have the inductor and resistor in series, and they're both negative in that region. So it's locally. Don't worry about the details. These are just all supporting things, just to show you that the whole point is, I'm not telling you philosophy. I'm telling you a way to do things, constructive. You just apply my formula, you come up with all these curves. Very trivial. These are standard sophomore stuff. Okay, that's why I say the good news is everyone can apply my theory. And that's the region on the lower right part with this negative slope. Okay, and from that, they realized that there is a region that's an edge of chaos, and they found out that they can pick a point where the real part is exactly zero, because it's negative, so it must be a point with zero. And then so you are left with only a reactive part. And now you can add another reactant to cancel it out, and that's the inductance. It's that simple. That's how you design an oscillator. Pick yourself an edge of chaos region, pick a point so that the real part is exactly zero, you are left with only the imaginary part. Pick a capacitor or inductor that has with that value, with the opposite sign, put it in series. There you are, bingo, you have an oscillator. That's how they designed that. And these are the details I don't have to give you. But by the way, this is called a supercritical Hopf bifurcation. Remember, there are two kinds of Hopf bifurcation. The really difficult one, the one that the Huxley didn't know, the one with a big jump, are the subcritical that I told you. This is the supercritical, this is the easy one. But that theorem tells you, again, it's in this same book here, there are two ways to get oscillation. This is the easy way. And they are there. You can see they got oscillation, they got limit cycle. Okay? And this is what's called a phase portrait to show you that there are three equilibrium points, the Q0, Q2, and Q1. The one in the middle is unstable. But the one in the right bottom, Q1, and the left bottom top are the stable ones. And if you look at all the red part, that's the basin of attraction that will go to Q0. And nearby there, you have the limit cycle on the left side. So this is a complete study of how to apply edge of chaos theorem to design a real circuit. So edge of chaos is not just for sophisticated sort of complexity theories. It's real engineering. Okay. All right. Now I think I'm going to go back. Can I go back? Okay. So for next week, these are the reads that I will propose. There are 2 more lectures left. And the title for next week is Teaching Monkeys to Compute Like a Turing Machine. You'll find a lot of fun with this. And then the last one is the deep part of that I will get into cosmology. I'll go into, for the physicists should love it, because I have a way of explaining CP, parity violation, CP violation, CPT violation even, okay? And then I will end up with this poem of mine, beautifully printed in color, and you will get it only if you're here, okay? All right, so thank you for listening, and we will have questions after this. Thank you.
Hi, Professor. Thanks very much for the very interesting talk. So I have one question. Actually, it contains 4 sub-questions about the application of edge of chaos. So first, I'm interested in that. So first, if I have a single cell, which is
if you have a what?
If I already have a neuron or cell, which is already at the edge of chaos, so how much energy I need to maintain that in this status?
How much what?
How much energy?
Energy.
Yes. So what
do you
need?
mean, how much energy? The point, if you are on the edge of chaos, you will have to supply energy to have that, okay? And how much energy all depends on the cell, you know. Some of them may be very little, some of them, it all depends on the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second question is that if now I have many cells, like a network of cells, so say I have 1 million of them.
You have one?
1 million of these cells. A
1
lot
million.
a lot of these cells.
They're all locally active?
Yes, they are just random. They are randomly collected. They are randomly initialized. So is that I will likely have some cells already at the edge of chaos? Will that happen or not?
So the cells are all different or they're identical?
Let's make it simple, just the same.
Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, the point is, if the cell is not doing anything, if you look at it and there's no waveform, and you know the local dimension and edge of chaos, there's only 2 possibilities, okay? So it means that they are dead mathematically, but they are potentially alive, okay? And then my third theorem says that if you have that situation, you can make it alive by just putting dissipation, okay? So that's why there are 3 theorems that I presented. Those are the fundamental, important, foundational results. First, it tells you how to make it locally active, how to massage the parameter. And once you know that you can have complexity, the second theorem, look at the principle. And then the third one says, if you are on the edge of chaos, because you don't have to be, It could be unstable. But if you're on the edge, you can destabilize it, not by doing something difficult, but just putting dissipation. Those are the three important results.
Okay. So, sorry, my third question is that, so now you have, so if I believe so, now you have cells, you have a lot of cells, or you have a soup of chaos cells. Will that need, so will that some cells that at agile chaos will they evolve, or they will finally disappear when time goes on, if the system, I mean the whole system is a closed system?
Well, it cannot be a closed system. You have to have a battery. Otherwise you would not have edge of chaos, okay? It cannot be a closed system. You have to have battery to power them.
Yeah, I mean,
otherwise you're back to second law.
In this system, I may have a battery, but the battery may eventually run out.
Okay.
So in
then
that sense,
everything is gone.
I see.
That's the second law. Remember this, the second law is very important, but from a point of view of complexity is useless, totally useless. Because what it says sentence you to death, right? You run out of battery, everything's dead. Right?
Okay.
The whole point about my local theory principle is that there is a complement to the second law, which allows you to grow. Okay, and but you have to pay for it. You have to supply energy.
Yes.
And Schrodinger knows that. He say you need energy. Schrodinger say you have to eat. You eat.
Okay.
Right.
I ask this question because I try to understand or see if there's how to apply the chaos theorem or the idea of chaos theorem into the, say, cosmos study. Like, can you explain, like, one only Earth has civilization? Or say, if we have so many stars, so many planets in the universe, how many of them may have the civilizations? Can that be explained by this tiny area of idea of chaos? And if that happens, how to use the idea of chaos to predict that whether the civilization can evolve into the universe or finally it will disappear? Yeah. So.
Well, obviously, you like I say, you have to have a source of energy. You need stars. You need suns, sun that were powered. In fact, it's amazing. In this book, The Magic Mountain, he talked about the sun produced, as the source of life. It's incredible, Thomas Mann. So we're talking now about cosmology here. You got to have a source of power energy, which we call the sun, and from that, you hope that just to have energy is not enough. Like I say, if I give you a battery, you can do nothing about it. You've got to have some ingredients, the right molecules, that somehow can combine, that are locally active. Okay, so that's why we don't see life everywhere. Maybe it's not easy. You got to have the right combination of the molecules to be locally active, and so that once it's locally active, you have the possibility of life. They say that you can actually self-reproduce. Okay, and that's a long shot. You got to have gastrulation, for example, and somehow they have the way of combining the sexes. In fact, there are things that don't need combined sex, but there are all kinds of things that nobody understood yet. But if you took really at the basic thing, you got to start with something that is locally active. Okay, and for all we know, most of those planets that have that are not. Because there are tons of them, billions of them, but they have no possible life because they were not in the Goldilocks zone. They're too hot or too cold. There's no. But we're talking about the Goldilocks zone of the cosmos, and that's still very big, still huge. Okay, and maybe there are possibility that you have some Earth-like planets there, and that is then entirely possible. That the same thing can evolve. Okay, and that's the big question that everybody hoping, think is challenging question, but they got to be locally active. The whole point, you got to start with some molecules that are locally active, like the Prigogine reaction, the Gastrulation. You have two molecules and become three. You got to Gelmans. You got to be able to amplify fluctuations. Okay, any other questions? No more questions? If no questions, I'm going to continue. I'll give you more examples, okay? Let me pause for a few more minutes just so that let you gel a little bit, because I realized I've been going so fast, but I've been repeating so many things, so just by repetition, I guess you get the basic idea. The basic idea really are three things. I have defined local activity mathematically, something that's constructive, so that you can calculate things. So nobody can accuse me that that's just another philosophy. Then I'll show you that that's in fact a law, in that if you don't have that, you cannot get anything interesting. And then the third principle say that if you are on the low edge of chaos, you can actually destabilize it with dissipation. Three fundamental theorems, which are the three unsolved problems in some sense. Yes, Gary?
Well, you mentioned that positive feedback is the typical physical mechanism for local activity.
A common one.
Yeah, but can you say more about the alternatives?
The what?
Can you say more about what the alternatives are?
Or the alternatives. Well, the alternative, I really cannot even specify the alternative, because there are very, very few that I could explain in detail, but there are a few situations that you can say that it doesn't look like positive feedback. But in fact, it could be, the fact that you say you cannot identify positive feedback, but maybe if you understand enough, you are going to show that somehow there's positive feedback. So for example, early on I give you an example about retina, and I told you that a retina made up of two sensors, the rods and the cones. The cones are the color vision one that needs a lot of light. But for the rods, just one photon is enough to trigger, reaction. Just one photon. And if you look at, I look at the chain of the rod, and I say, where is the positive feedback? But I'm not deep enough into the biology and the physics to understand where. But you can see that obviously there got to be a way of some kind of a chain reaction of amplifying from one photon to 2 to 4 to 6, And when you have that kind of thing, it's very likely it's positive feedback. Okay. In fact, one could possibly even define that as positive feedback. Okay? Because we are really too narrow-minded. When we talk about positive feedback, we think of amplifier. Something goes bad. And so I would imagine that someday one could actually argue and make a broad enough definition of positive feedback to show that to get local activity, essentially you need positive feedback. It's just that there are many ways of skinning a cat, right? Yeah, but the most common one that you and I acknowledge, I like the laser thing, the obvious one, the camera looking at the television of yourself. Those are the obvious things. But indeed, I think one should be able to hopefully one day argue or actually come up with a more comprehensive theory, say that local activity comes from positive feedback. Any other question? If there are no questions, let me move on, because there are an interesting example that I think would help understand this thing. Oh, by the way, the end code for today is, I always like to go back to my old Roman classics, and this is very well summarize what I've been talking about so far. Marcus Aurelius, I like to say that either it is a well-arranged universe or chaos hauled together, but still a universe. But can a certain order subsist in thee, and disorder in the all? Think about it, it's very deep stuff. And throughout this book, you can see Schrodinger keep talking about order from disorder, but he also said order from order. He may not have read Marcus Aurelius, but he's essentially saying what, or Schrodinger was saying what Marcus Aurelius was saying. Okay? All right, now let me go back to something fundamental. Everybody knows about first law of thermodynamics, and I have a simple way of remembering it for kids, school-age children are safe. First law of thermodynamics simply says there is no free lunch. Okay? I think you all agree. The second law of thermodynamics, I have also a statement. All lunch costs some minimum price. That's the second law. The correct statement, of course, is that the entropy of any closed system increases with time. That's the technical statement. And then the second law, unfortunately, implies that no structure or pattern can exist within any closed system. Then there is a third law. How many of you know a third law? If you have to be a chemist of some sort, but there is a third law. And the third law says the entropy of every system at absolute zero can always be taken to be zero. Okay? I mean, it's an interesting statement. But I'll tell you there's a problem with the third law. Stan may not agree with me, but I'll tell you what the problem is, okay? So by the way, now I call my local activity is the fourth law, so that there's no controversy, because I used to call it the third law, and people challenge me, with Nernst law. And I'll tell you why it should be renamed, or many people thought it should be renamed to the third law. So the fourth law is what I just said. Complexity is impossible without local activity. And it's a perfectly thermodynamic. It's because it's the complement of the second law is where the entropy can increase. Okay? All right. Now, let me tell you that there are several equivalent statements of second law. There's a Kelvin-Planck inversion, which is that it is impossible to convert heat completely into mechanical work. That's why I say, every lunch has a minimum cost. There's a Clausius version, which says it's impossible to transfer heat from a cooler to a hotter body. Everybody knows that. Then there's the entropy version, says that entropy is monotonic increasing function in a closed system. They all read very different, but the good news is that they're all equivalent. You can actually prove that one implies the other. So there's no quarrel. This is the second law. It's a clear, correct, different statement. Okay? But not true with the third law. The third law, or the Nernst theorem, was postulated by Walter Nernst in 1912 and has been debated extensively by Einstein and Planck. Unfortunately, there is still no universal formulation of the third law. Believe it or not, first of all, not many people know about third law, and one reason maybe is it's totally useless anyway for engineers. Okay, so what's wrong with the existing third law? There are at least 5 things I can think of. First, there's no universally acceptable formulation exists. I mean, even Einstein don't agree with Planck, for example. Number 2, existing formulations are not equivalent, unlike the second law. You cannot say one implies the other. Third, no formulation that's been advocated for the third law is sufficiently general. Fourth, no formulation can avoid unresolved problems. They're always, you give me one formula, I tell you there's a hole in there, okay? And then the scope of applicability is tiny compared to the first and second law. I've never found any use at all of the third law. So what's the use of a third law when nobody ever uses it, right? So since the classical third law of thermodynamics is ill-posed in the sense that there's no agreement and had many different unequivalent versions, since the third law is rarely taught in thermodynamics course due to the lack of applications, many researchers had proposed to name, and not only me, okay, that the local activity principle should in fact be called the third law of thermodynamics because it is tailored for open systems, which allows the entropy to be a non-monotonic function, thereby extending applicability of the second law to open systems. Besides, it provides the missing foundation for complexity research. And talking about entropy, by the way, I've always been confused about entropy, by the way, and I have to confess, and I still am confused today. And I don't feel so bad because John von Neumann, who many people consider the smartest guys around, says that no one knows what entropy really is. That was in 1940, and that's John von Neumann. So it's non-trivial concept, okay? And in fact, I don't know, of course, all of you know about information theory, right? Claude Shannon, okay? Claude Shannon used the word entropy, and everybody thought that's a great name for him. But did you know how Shannon used the word entropy? Well, Shannon went to the most revered person around, which is von Neumann, and asked advice. He presented his theories for von Neumann. He said, John, what name should I give this, this new concept information theory? And John von Neumann just said, it's easy. Call it entropy, because nobody understood anyway. Nobody will question you. That's what the name came from. True story. Okay? All right. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. So far, it's been general. I'm going to give you 2 real examples. First one is called the Gilroy-Meinhardt equation. You can see this is a reaction diffusion equation with 2 diffusion terms on the right. You can create a circuit easily for this thing. And by picking the parameter, you can put them in the edge of chaos region easily. So, for example, look at the right-hand side. The left to right is time, from time 0 to time on the right positive. And the length thing is the distance from top to the bottom. So what you're seeing here is a periodic solution. It's like a square web. It goes up, you see the big red, and then become very skinny, and then up again, up again. And because it was almost a pores, I can hardly print it. So that's why you see these stripes. And now, Gilroy-Meinhardt has a good way of saying that this can explain all kinds of shear patterns, okay? The shear, in the beginning, is just one layer. And then the shear grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and then just follow that equation, and that's what you get, okay? So that's how the shear comes from. And then the Nautilus. So there's a beautiful book all about this, the Nautilus, for example. And you can see this is the pattern. And you can just imagine as this grows, this thing curved, and then you will have all this pattern. So these are just examples. And for people who didn't have the theory, including Meinhardt theory, they thought it's a big deal. But I've just shown you that you can have all kinds of patterns by just a single CNN. And by just tuning 2 parameters, you can get everything. And so these are not deep concepts. These are just manifestations of something deep. And that something deep is edge of chaos, okay? And now, how about something more mundane? How about ants? What about ants? Well, individual ants are quite stupid, actually. Why do I say that? Well, it's very simple. Because no one has succeeded in teaching individual ants to do anything at all. Let me give you an example. You starve an ant, and the ant is starving, and you put sugar always on the right fork of this bifurcation, on these tunnels. Always put fork. And so you put a starving ant there, and you would expect the ant to always turn right, to look for food, because you should learn. This never happened. The ant would still make mistakes, They never learn, for example. In that sense, they are stupid. But because they can build anthills and all kinds of things, in collective things, that's because you can make them locally active, And now, it turns out that the ants are also lazy. They like to do exercises randomly, like what I'm doing now, and then I'll just fall asleep, rest, okay? And then afterward, they will run again, and it's random. There's no fixed period. Every ant would do that, okay? So here's a study by some entomologists. They put about 10 ants, and they monitor how many ants at any one time. This is in minutes, okay, by video camera. And you can see that the number of ants that are actually walking randomly is random. You can see there's no pattern. So they researched them from 10 up to 20. So you now have 20 ants, and still, no pattern. Now remember, the number of ants now is a parameter. You are massaging a parameter. You are trying to make it locally active, in other words. Right now, they're not locally active, so no pattern, okay? Increase that to 40 ants. It's still, not much, still random. Go to 80 ants, all of a sudden it's periodic. It's 25 minutes. It's incredible. Suddenly, as the number of ants exceeds some threshold, they decide to take a coffee break simultaneously every 25 minutes. That's local activity, okay? You finally get to the point, the parameter now is the number of ants. And using my theory, you can show that this is locally active. So this is collective behavior. In contrast, what is not collective? For example, an orchestra does not exhibit collective behavior because the behavior of all the individual instrumentalists is guided by conductor. So you have to follow the conductor. Well, the ant, there's no conductor, okay? These are collective things. It's just that once you reach the threshold of dog activity or edge of chaos, boom, you have interesting thing. This is a paper published some years ago from my lab, actually, and Professor Roska's a colleague. And we start with, on the left, one ant. This is a CNN, by the way. So just to show you, a CNN can emulate many things. This is CNN emulating the ant behavior. With only one ant you see on top is random. One, you see what 1 or 0, 1 or 0 is random. The bottom one is just a Fourier transform, just to show you that it's random. Okay. Now Professor Rosa they increased up to there's a colony of 4x4 grid. So now you have 16 ants. With these 16 ants, you can see that it's still not periodic. It looks like a period, but not quite. You can see it's not repeating. Okay, and you look at the Fourier transform, it's random. Go to 8 by 8, 64. So when you get a 64, you got local activity, and all of a sudden you can see that 60 ants are now become periodic. Okay, so whether it's ants or shell or whatever, these are just examples. There's a common theory that explains all of this, and simply that you need local activity, in particular edge of chaos, and then you can get all of this. Is a paper, by the way, that I just drew this example. Okay, now, and we can apply the same thing to static patterns and dynamic patterns. But I think I have only 2 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly. By the way, quick question. How many of you recognize this picture? Great. That's because of associative memory. That's because of local activity. So now, this is a static pattern. So if you now look at the evolution, as I told you earlier, it is how it evolves. And eventually, when it's steady state, you have the picture. And so you are in the Bayesian of attraction. All those of you who raised your hand, that was the new Bayesian of attraction. Okay? That's a static attractor, and because local activity in play here. But this is interesting. You have a group of people face there. One of them is your friend. The human eyes can easily recognize a familiar face from a large crowd of people, even if the face is partially blocked by other faces. But no existing digital computer, even the most advanced, can imitate this astonishing fit in real time. Well, we can do that with log activity. And finally, suppose you have a maze and you want to find what is the minimum time you need to go from point 1 to point 2. This is the NP complete problem that is, you just have to repeat everything. But if you use a wave, you launch a wave, and you can see that it's just like fire to burn. When you have branches, it just keep burning, and you just keep following until the red thing finally reach home, and you calculate, you look at the stopwatch, and you know what the time is. That's an example. Okay. And now let me show you another interesting example. You have 3 obstacles on the top left, 4 on the next top, 5 on the lower top, and then the 7 on the top. These are from Professor Fortuna's group against Sicily. And the goal is to design an algorithm where the robot can navigate without hitting any obstacle. It's easy. They just launch a spiral wave or circular target wave. And when target wave collide, it annihilates. So the point where it annihilates, it is where you want to follow. You can see that that's where you avoided the obstacles. And now this is interesting. This is called Voronoi diagram. The problem is divide the line between 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 prime so that every point on one side of the line is the nearest to that point. This is the NP complete problem. And I will show you that there's a chemical example that shows that this annihilation of intersection will lead to the Voronoi pattern. And just one more example, I think you will get a kick out of this. There are many faces. Only one of them in the third row from the left is smiling. Everybody else, is frowning. Question: find the smiling face. You use spiral waves. 2 of them, the inhibiting and exciting, and then you can see that you get that thing. Okay. You got to give me 1 more minute. Okay. This is something that you would love to have. I like you, all of you, because my student loves it. Go buy Tia Maria, okay, and some whipping cream. Now, pour in some Tia Maria, and then pour in about 1 millimeter of the milk on top. You've seen this example many times in my talk. Everything becomes homogeneous, right? But not so in this case. So you put in the milk about 1 millimeter, wait 5 minutes. What do you see? You see patterns. My student loves it because they taste good as well. Okay, perfect example of local activity. And thank you very much for your patience.